John.
I didn't ever intend to become Elton John. I just wanted to be involved in music and play it and.
Last summer, Elton John disappeared for no apparent reason. When he returned, his new record is the result of a medical procedure that left him unable to sign his own name. Doctors say they don't know if he will ever recover. Really gloomy place of uncertainty. Is this the reason he abruptly cancelled everything? The tale will soon be released, and it's not the virus that his team said Elton had. At the age of 4, John's story started in a peaceful living room rather than a music hall. Reginald Dwight, who was quite young, sat at his grandmother's piano and his mother was astounded when lessons performed the Skater's Waltz flawlessly by ear. He had only listened once and was able to play that type of game without any instruction. His life would be defined by his natural skill, even after he began taking courses. One teacher claimed that when he was 7 years old, he could hear a lengthy classical piece once and replay it as if it were a recording. By the time he was a boy, he had already become the center of attention while performing and imitating Jerry Lee Lewis at family get-togethers. Flair's self-taught spark set him apart and propelled him forward. Despite being from a working-class area in Pinter, Middlesex, he was awarded a scholarship at the age of 11 to every Saturday. He made his way to London's esteemed Royal Academy of Music. The city for classical music instruction. He excelled academically, but in his heart he didn't enjoy it. He once acknowledged that he didn't practice much and occasionally skipped class to take the metro. He was ahead due to his innate talent. All changed in 1967 during a bus voyage with his band Bluology. He was asked just a quick question: "What will you call yourself now that we've created it?" At that point, Reginald Dwight stopped being Reginald Dwight. He combined his bandmates' names to create a new one. Long John Baldry and Elton Dean both desired something unique that stood out. A few years later, he legally altered it to Elton Hercules John. Choosing the middle name Hercules based on a British horse rather than the myth, he was freed by the comedy name, which allowed him to go past his modest beginnings and embark on a more expansive existence. Prior to becoming a celebrity, Elton did what many session labor for struggling musicians. In 1969, he played the piano subtly on the hall, received only $12 for his song, "He Ain't Heavy He's My Brother," credited, but at about the same time, his playing gave the song more genuine emotion. He also sang backup vocals for the song, "Delilah These," by Tom Jones. His abilities were honed by behind-the-scenes work, which demonstrated that he could handle any musical situation, even if the world didn't yet know his name. But a brief advertisement in a music magazine called Liberty Records marked a turning point. Searching for talent, and Elton and Bernie Taupin, a young songwriter. When Elton applied, he informed the record boss that he could compose music but not lyrics. When the executive gave him Bernie's poetry, their lives were forever altered. On the train trip home, Elton read Bernie's remarks and was immediately moved. Shortly after they first met, they began collaborating. They initially created songs for other vocalists, but their real magic occurred when they wrote songs specifically for Elton. Their collaboration grew from a random advertisement would last for decades, but initially, things weren't going well. When their debut album, Empty Sky, was released in 1969, Elton was devastated. He found the tracks, particularly the title track, to be excellent. The album's combination of weird instruments and trippy sounds was too bizarre. That early failure didn't even result in its publication in the United States until years later, when Elton had already achieved fame. Made him and Bernie reevaluate everything. They began penning songs that were more straightforward and uncomplicated, and that transformed. Bernie wrote down everything one day in 1969 in the kitchen of Elton's mother. During breakfast, the lyrics to a song were written on a sheet of paper. It even had tea stains on it. He gave it to Elton, who proceeded to the piano and, in only 20 minutes, had wrote the song's tune, which became his first big hit, breaking into the top 10 in the US and the UK. The lyrics were incredibly honest despite Bernie had never experienced love, and nobody is truly certain who the subject of the song was. Elton's striking differences. Offstage, when friends first saw him, he was timid and even insecure. He hardly moved when performing in the UK, but everything changed when he traveled to the US. Particularly on his debut performance at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. He transformed into a fearless, iconic performer who strutted, danced, and owned the stage. His friend Stuart Epps was taken aback, comparing it to witnessing an utterly different guy. Elton subsequently clarified that his stage persona served as a means of escaping his anxieties. He added, Elton allowed me to be the person Reg was too scared to be. Elton John did something nobody knew about in 1972 and 1975. He put out 7 consecutive albums that all reached number 1, something no one else had ever done. He dominated the charts in the US for almost 40 weeks during those years. At one point, it seemed like a new Elton record was released every other month. Honky Chateau was the first to do so in 1972. From that album, we got Rocket Man and topped the charts for 5 weeks before Don't Shoot Me, I'm Just the Piano Player came out. Captain Fantastic, Caribou's greatest hits album, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and The Rock of the Westies and The Brown Dirt Cowboy, each of whom ascended directly to the top, and keep in mind that it all started when he was only 24 years old, prior to Honky Chateau had never had a number 1 album anywhere, therefore he was suddenly unable to stop. These 6 years were his creative zenith. It wasn't just about the numbers. One of those albums would go on to be regarded as one of the best ever produced. During this, Elton also developed a close acquaintance with John Lennon during that crazy period. Bond swiftly developed, and Lennon was going through a difficult period. Living in Los Angeles, drinking hard, and feeling lost, Elton is Yoko Ono. Become a constant in his life. They collaborated on a song that Lennon had begun after listening to a late night. Whatever gets you through the night was a remark that Elton found helpful. Complete the song and placed a wager that Lennon would join if it became the number 1 song. Lennon shrugged it off when he saw him on stage. He hadn't done a live performance in years. Didn't intend to start over, but the song became the number 1 hit, therefore he was right on the money. In November 1974, Lennon took the stage for his last live performance at Madison Square Garden. Even more potent was his reunion with Yoko backstage that evening. Shifted from there. Elton also sang a light-hearted duet that caught everyone off guard when he was riding this wave. Unexpectedly, he collaborated with Kiki Dee on the song, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, in 1976. Bright, lively, infectious, and purposefully reminiscent of Motown-style duets, they even composed it under fictitious names for amusement. The song became the UK's number 1 smash. Topped the US charts for the first time in his career. What's crazy is Dusty Springfield wasn't feeling well, so they had to back out of the original writing. Elton even flipped his standard procedure. Bernie Taupin added the words after he had written the music. Despite never appearing on a real album, the B-side song, Snow, became one of Elton's biggest successes. Bernie later separated from Queen, and the two did not land the same Elton. Claiming that it originated in a chaotic setting. One of the most notable aspects of this whole when Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was being made, you might have thought it was a double album. It would take months to complete that epic, yet Elton completed it in just 17 days. Things didn't go as planned. They attempted to record in Jamaica at first, but though the studio was in ruins, with inadequate security, firearms, and even threats of violence, bailed and instead traveled to a tranquil chateau in France, where the magic happened. Occurred every morning. Elton would get up, sit at the piano, and compose music. Sometimes he only needed 20 minutes to finish one while having breakfast. The band would typically record them in a few takes that same day. One of those, Elton penned the song, Candle in the Wind, in the morning and had it recorded. Following the outcome of 17 tracks and 76 minutes of song, which would eventually sell more than 20 million copies and be listed on the list of the best albums ever released. Vodka was one of the first working titles. And Tonics, but ultimately became one of rock music's most recognizable albums. And Elton John was more than simply a music celebrity in the 1970s, he led an opulent life in a sparkling world of excess. He was spending more than $40,000 at the height of his success. After a U.S. tour, he spent a week shopping and came back to England with 6742 trunks and bags filled with everything he had purchased according to his preferences. The more cocaine he consumed, the more outlandish he became. He once purchased a radio shaped like a doll with volume controls on its chest wearing a see-through negligee. He once purchased a life-size gorilla statue wearing Edwardian garb, but the most outrageous incident occurred when he chose to purchase a real tram from Australia following a 3-day Coca-Cola binge, not a prototype, but an actual one that needed to be transported to Britain and placed in his. He also purchased a life-sized Chinook chopper to use in his yard. T-Rex years later, he sold the majority of his strange collection at auction and transformed $8 million. His drug use affected more than just the one night he spent in New York. John Lennon and I were in the middle of a cocaine binge while staying at a motel. Was 2 a.m., and they were both intoxicated and suspicious that someone was approaching. For them, when the door was knocked on, Elton became alarmed and muttered, "Is the police?" And it took him 5 minutes to glance through the peephole. Andy, not the police, was the one who did it. However, Lennon refused to open the door and instead froze the artist. Warhol rang the bell and knocked on the door, but the two musicians did not respond. Warhol eventually gave up and departed after acting as though they weren't there. According to Lennon, who chuckled about it, that was the fun part of cocaine. Elton was also a frequenter of the renowned New York nightclub Studio 54, where the wealthy and well-known partied unrestrainedly, frequently appearing in his most outrageous costumes to join on the dance floor. Pals like Bianca Jagger and Liza Minnelli occasionally, and Bianca would even perform spontaneous duets for the audience as Warhol yelled images. Anything could happen there. And Elton typically did acknowledge that he was at his most unruly during this period, staying up for days at a time, smoking marijuana, and drinking alcohol. Elton created history in spite of all of this turmoil by drinking whiskey and getting high. He became the first openly flamboyant Western rock star in 1979, amid the Cold War. Celebrity to play in the Soviet Union, he performed in 8 Moscow performances, and some people spent a third of their monthly income merely to gain entry to Leningrad because tickets were so in high demand. He was anxious and unsure whether anyone in the USSR even recognized him. He was instructed by Soviet authorities not to perform the Beatles back in the USSR, so naturally he did. Elton subsequently made a joke.